But for now, I'd like to pass it over to Michael MacMillan with our special guest today, Digital Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Kenzie. Just going to confirm, are we recording, Kenzie?
We are indeed. And that's helpful for all of you to know, because after this event, you can watch it on our YouTube.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So as Kenzie mentioned, we're going to do slightly different 10-minute audit. If you're been to our past SEO brunches, we usually like to take a 10-minute audit, come up with 3 or 4 actionable items. So we take a broad view at people's websites, either established or starting to be or newly developed, and come up with 3 or 4 insights that they can help they can action in order to increase their organic footprint. But we were chatting with our wonderful sponsor, Digital Nova Scotia, and wanted to come up with something a little bit different to kick off 2021. And they mentioned, what if we were to do a podcast? How can we use SEO to do a podcast? And I said, I like this scenario. Let's dig a little bit deeper into it, because I think a lot of what we do from a content standpoint can definitely be reused as not reused, but the similar tactics would work very well for informing podcast information. And yeah, again, my name is Mike MacMillan. I'm the principal SEO consultant for MacMillan Search, and we present SEO Brunch in partnership with Digital Nova Scotia. If you'd like to add me to LinkedIn, always open to connect with people there, and we can chat a little bit further. We also have an SEO Brunch group in there that I can point you to. If you on LinkedIn, it's a private group. If you don't get your question answered here, if you want to dig a little bit deeper into some subject, or you just want a peer group of people who are also interested in SEO, you can. We'd love to have you there. And we also post useful information either from us or from other places we find that can help drive your organic traffic. So today we're going to talk about using SEO research to inform a podcast. Particularly to inform podcast questions. So maybe you're looking for the main subject matter, or maybe you're looking for some secondary pieces of content. What am I going to ask, and how can I use SEO to inform that? So everybody is podcasting these days. Might be a bit of a saturated market, but at the same time, it's still emerging. One cool thing that I remember reading about from a podcasting standpoint is the analytics is still maturing. So it's kind of neat because the subject matter can get really a lot more interesting because people aren't completely data driven. There's a lot, we're definitely getting better at measuring success, particularly with podcasting, but it's not to the level, let's say, of a website or say a piece of blog content. So I think people are more willing to experiment with it, which makes a really interesting channel for getting people interested in your brand or your subject or your products and services. So I like to go back to Maslow's hierarchy of SEO needs. The company Moz came up with this, and I find a very clear understanding of things. You'll see down at the bottom, is your site accessible is the kind of the base foundation. And the next piece up, compelling content. And that's what we're talking about today, an element of that compelling content. Beyond that, it gets into keyword optimization, user experience, share worthiness, but we're really getting kind of not quite foundation, but very close to the bottom of the foundation is creating compelling content. And podcasting is a great way to create this compelling content. Because not only can you create a podcast, if you're recording this, you can also leverage this and create some content. We'll talk a little bit further about some tactics we've used with audio, video content that can kind of streamline your processes. So first thing I like to determine is if you don't know what your top level subject matter is going to be for this podcast, SEO can help inform that. But what we're going to do, I'm going to use Deep Sense for our example here. They've been a member for 10 minutes, or they've been a guest twice for our 10-minute audits. Very big fans of us. But if we wanted to find out, if we were to do a branded search for this company, we can find out very quickly based on their title and their descriptions, what kind of information, like what kind of product and service they're offering to give you that top level subject matter. So it's pretty straightforward. With Deep Sense, we're seeing, they're into AI and machine learning specifically for the ocean economy. So what is that main subject matter? I mean, you can also ask them. I highly recommend you just having a conversation with the people. Like, what would you like to talk about? Can really help get the ball rolling, and then you can dig a little bit deeper in there. But and like I was saying, you can find out a lot of this information usually from their homepage title, because they're going to clearly define what their product and service is, or what the broader subject matter is. So this is where you can kind of start your research. So like as I said, AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning specifically for ocean economies. There's three main subject matters there: artificial intelligence, machine learning, ocean economies. Now, how they all tie together, that can be kind of what we can discover. So yeah, the main subject, as we said, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and ocean economies. Now, initially when we started digging into this, I thought maybe artificial intelligence for ocean economies. Okay, we searched for that. There's not a lot of volume around that. Doesn't mean that people aren't curious about that, but people aren't searching for it at the level where that the whole string, artificial intelligence for ocean economies, isn't as common as artificial intelligence. Now it's not as driven, not as specific down, or say ocean economies, not as specific down to what Deep Sense does. But we know that these three main subject matters can start informing where we take things. So first place I like to do is figure out what relevant questions are being asked, specifically in the search results. The cool thing is Google kind of does this work for you. If I was to search AI and scroll down, this is about the third or fourth position, sometimes a little bit lower, sometimes a little bit higher. But it's the people also ask section. It's a great opportunity to figure out what kind of questions people are asking. And this can help start outlining what you're going to ask your podcast guests, for an example. So for AI, for an example, we have what exactly is AI? What are the 4 types of AI? What are the 3 types of AI? So, researching those individual types of AI may be something you can explore and then try to tie that back into the ocean economies. Is AI real? Nah, okay, maybe that's not going to relate so much. When we're working with people also ask, I always have to have a human eye on that. You can't formulaically pull out all that information and just run with it. We have tools that can pull out all the questions asked for a string of keywords, but you can go through it individually, start collecting all these individual questions and figuring out if they're relevant. Having that human eye on there. So maybe, is AI real? Something to dig into. You might be able to work around it, but what exactly is AI? You're clearly defining what artificial intelligence is. Could be a great opener. What are the 4 types? I'd look into what these 4 and 3 types are, just for an example. Now we get into artificial intelligence. So AI being the acronym for artificial intelligence, questions are slightly changing. So what is it? Artificial intelligence with examples. We're getting a little bit more broader content ideas. What are the 4? Now we're back into this 4 types and 3 types. So I'm really curious about that. If I was digging into that, this might be a question, even just, are there 3 or 4 types of AI? Might be somewhat an interesting subject to start with. Is AI dangerous? A good way to end it all off. Keep people with, or end of the podcast, a little bit of doom, get people kind of a little scared, get them enticed, get some emotions running, potentially. Machine learning, now we're getting some different types of questions. What is the best programming language for machine learning? What is machine learning used for? Can I teach myself machine learning? And is machine learning hard? So there's some great questions in there as well to start figuring things out. Up there. So any questions about that? We do have Jonathan and John, and Rochelle in the room. Does that make sense so far?
It's great, Michael, as usual, buddy.
Oh, John Chason, how are you doing, buddy?
Couldn't be better.
Excellent. So we're going to go into a tool called Also Ask, which if anybody, I've mentioned this in the past, they've just revamped their website. And they've cut off how many free searches you can do, but right now they're in beta. So you can get 1,000 searches a month right now for free. So they just want you to set up an account. I'm sure they're going to market you down the road, something to pay attention to, but it's a great tool. I highly recommend it. And what this tool allows you to do is to enter a main piece of subject, and it breaks out questions a little bit further and a little bit more in depth. So you can get secondary questions and even down like 3rd and 4th. So, and this allows you to create a bit of a hierarchy. So if you've got 3 main topics you want to cover, this can help you break down the subtopics and the subtopics to those subtopics. So for an example, we ran machine learning through here, and the output is quite large. You can see it breaks down here. We'll go look at what is the machine learning. There's about 4 questions that came up here as the main sub questions for machine learning. We drill into those a little bit further, like what is machine learning used for? What is machine learning examples? What are the 3 types of machine learning? What exactly is machine learning? And then you even get a little more granular, like what is machine learning exactly? What are two types of machine learning? A lot of seem very obsessed with the different types of it. What are the two categories of machine learning? What is online learning and machine learning? Just for an example. So this tool, also ask.com, which Kenzie's posted in the chat for everybody. Please, I highly recommend setting up an account, and any subject you're talking about, you can enter this in. You can even get, when you get into those, the main subject matter, you can start answering, or sorry, you can start putting those questions in there as well, and it will start going down a little bit more granular as well. The output is also, you can do an output as a CSV. So you can use a tool like SEO Surfer is a tool we like to use for Chrome extension. And what it does is it gives you an idea of what kind of volume around that. So if you explore the volume around these individual questions, we always recommend you take the question mark off when you're checking, because rarely do humans actually write a question mark when they're asking a question in search results. So you might get a false positive on volume if you put in a question, excuse me, with the question mark at the end. It might say, you know, there's been 0 searches, but you strip that question off, it does the exact phrase match. There might be 10, 20 people searching this in a month. Something just to keep in mind. Transcribe your podcast as well. We do this with the SEO Brunch. We use a tool called otter.ai. It feeds off of our cloud recording of the Zoom calls. And you know, it's a robot. It does the best job it can. You're still going to need a human to go through it, but it does save a lot of legwork. And the cool thing about this is your podcast isn't just meant to just be a podcast and drop it out. You can use that content and develop. You can take, let's say you had 3 subsections for your podcast, 3 main questions you're going to ask with a bunch of sub questions under that. Those 3 main questions can all be standalone blog posts by themselves. And then you can use those with a call to action on each blog post to get people listening to the full podcast. So maybe that question really resonates with people and they want to dig a little bit deeper into it. It also gives you a chance to go a little bit further into this subject matter. But you can use this transcription as a great kickoff for getting your content started, and just have to have that human eye go through, edit it for grammar. Some very industry specific things you might mention may not get picked up by the robot or might be misspelled. But we highly recommend that because we found it really does save a pile of time when you're creating this content.
Michael, could I just ask a question in there?
Yes, Rochelle, of course.
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Rochelle from Digital Nova Scotia. I just wanted to pose a question to Jonathan Burns, who's with us from Podstarter. We've been having some discussions with Podstarter about potentially launching a podcast. It's all very preliminary. And one of the most interesting things that I took from our discussion was all the different pieces of micro content that Podstarter recommended that we could create from the podcast. And I'm just wondering, Jonathan, if you could inform us a little bit on what types of micro content that you typically see created from podcast content. And then maybe Michael could expand a little bit on how we could optimize that micro content for SEO.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good lead into this as well, because Michael's just talking about the transcription element. One of the things that we'll typically do with a podcast is transcribe it as well. We use Hemi a fair amount as another alternative as a transcription tool. There's a ton of them as well. And roughly they're about 90-95% accurate. You still have to go in and finesse it, especially if you're into technical or unknown terminology. But what we do from that transcript is we're able to then find moments of, we call it brilliance or phrases that seem to be somewhat relevant or focused in a particular area. And we pull out these as quotables and either create it as a straight audio file or a video file as well, and create these audiograms that can then hit all your social feeds as well. So I can do a one-liner that's an audiogram, put it into my LinkedIn channel, and use that either as a redirect or a promotion for the podcast, or if the primary objective of the podcast is to re-steer back to the website, we do that same element as well. So we use, a hour-long conversation to be able to create these micro content, small pieces of content to redirect either to promote the podcast or to redirect back to a website. And it's amazing of the types of stuff that you can get out are either images of people that are on the guests, quotable elements, so just a visual piece, audiograms, thought leadership or blogs as well. We actually use this to write 75% of the blog content coming from the conversation. So it's there's a lot that you can create from that micro content piece.
I love that. And I didn't even add that element of how you can leverage this for social media. It all ties together, and it's a brilliant web of content. I saw Christina, you have your hand up. Did you have a question you'd like to ask?
More so, I wanted to share a tool that I used when I played around with using audio in my social media posts. There's a free tool, well, it's freemium, I should say, called Headliner that I use to, I think it's headliner.app. Yeah. Yes, it is. So basically, I use that to kind of make videos and content surrounding, as Jonathan said, those moments of genius. That tool I found to be very helpful and very easy to use. So what you could do is take, snippets from your podcast episode, and it gives you a lot of different modules to kind of visualize what's happening in that podcast episode. So I wanted to share that tool in case you wanted to kind of change your podcast into actual workable posts for social media or like Instagram stories, Facebook, etc.
Awesome, Christina. Thank you so much for that. We're going to definitely look into it. Any other questions or comments? All right. Oh, I'm going to jump ahead here. So when we're creating that content, we want to break that content into smaller chunks. As Jonathan was saying, and then as well, we want to, and I love the concept of the quotables. We didn't even consider that, and something we'll definitely be adding to our social media approach as well. Thinking about this more from blog posts, releasing as a blog post, call to action to that podcast or something else that you might want to be driving people to. You might have a guide going, but I know we've got a guide going right now that we're pushing people towards. One thing to also think is internal linking to other posts. So if you're breaking let's say a 30-minute podcast that's got 3 main big points and you're breaking into 3 individual podcasts, you want to make sure we always have internal linking. From an SEO standpoint, that's our way of whatever. Let's say we have 3 posts and one really takes off. You can prop up the other ones with your authority. People would use the term SEO juice. I personally don't like the thought of SEO with juice. I don't know. It's kind of reminds me of the word moist in a way. So not my favorite, but either way, we can build this authority around other posts. So one post takes off and people are sharing it. You can spread some of that authority by doing some in-content linking to the other posts, as well as the podcast and any other things you're mentioning that have to do with your service offering or previous posts that you've done. So to recap a little bit, we want to determine that top level subject. So it's just figuring out what your potential guest is about or what they want to talk about. You can ask them. You can also just find this information just by searching their brand and get a little bit further into that. What relevant questions are being asked? So that can be easily determined through the people also ask section. There's lots of third-party tools as well that can determine questions. If you've ever used Answer the Public, you can just put in a main piece of subject and they'll go through the who, what, where, why, when. They do this beautiful image, but you can also export that as a CSV, so you can just get the raw data. Get those secondary questions. That's when we like to use the also ask.com tool. Transcribe your podcast. So you've got this content, might as well repurpose it. Get that out on as many channels as you can that makes sense. Create that content from the transcript. And we didn't talk about this in too much detail, but distributing, always about distribution. Content, you create the piece, you want to get it out there. And the distribution doesn't stop the day you release it. It's an ongoing process. We like to use the tool Google Trends to determine when things are popular. Now, COVID over the last year has definitely thrown off the trend of volume spikes and whatnot. But generally speaking, you can get an idea of seasonality or when things become very important. People start talking about taxes in the next couple months, for an example. So if you're doing something around accounting, it can be a double-edged sword. If you're doing something around accounting, maybe all the accountants are too busy because of taxes. They're going to get that moment after March when people have all submitted their taxes where they can breathe a little bit, and then they start researching how they can learn more about their service offering and make their service offering better. But if you're an individual interested in taxes, now is your time. Whereas the industry person with taxes, the accountant, might be too busy to start worrying about this, just trying to get through until they're ready, and then their spike would be afterwards. Also like to mention, we released this in December. We have a guide, MacMillanSearch.com/guide. It's our guide to web copy. It's from our experience of directing companies to create content with SEO in mind. It's very geared towards SEO, but will help with anybody who's creating content. And everybody's welcome to download that. And didn't mean to click the button. Excuse me. That's what it looks like when you click the button, if anybody's wondering. And our next SEO brunch is February 22nd from 12:30 till 2 o'clock. We still got another hour left, but my part's done here until we get to the Q&A section. Sorry, Rochelle and Jonathan, did you have any other questions before we move on and wrap things up, or any other things you'd like to add? Because I really appreciated your input.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, my question was actually for you, Jonathan. I was going to ask a little bit about, because I know you offer as Podstarter a lot of advice on how to structure the content of a podcast. And I was wondering what sort of strategies that you might use in relation to this when you're coming up with questions and things like that.
Well, it's interesting because I like the conversation around our perspective is almost the opposite from how to build out a podcast. A lot of the times it is our corporate clients that have a message that they're trying to communicate instead of what the market is looking for. That said, as a podcaster, we're also building podcasts that are story driven first, what resonates with an audience. And that's sort of like your typical, how do I build a great TV show? How do I build some piece of content that engages with an audience? And there's much more insight into that. Most podcasts are, what we see right now are sort of the interview or the unscripted approach. And it's starting to shift around more of a scripted message that then is able to be insightful or supported by an SEO strategy to be able to say the scripted element needs to resonate with a key audience. So there's a couple of different ways of going at building out that podcast, whether it's your internal story, whether it's understanding your external market first. Yeah, like I said, there's a bunch of different ways to go at it.
Awesome. I completely appreciate that. And like I said, our approach right here is it's very SEO informed. So yeah, we wouldn't. I completely understand your guys' direction. It makes perfect sense.
One of the biggest challenges with most podcasters is growing an audience, gaining reach, and understanding how typically our approach is from a podcast standpoint, half the time is spent in building the podcast, the other half is in marketing and promotion, trying to grow that audience. And that's a stumbling block for most podcasters trying to break through and understanding who that audience is. How do you reach them? Key marketing elements is really where an SEO dialogue fits really well on that growth strategy.
I would add in that just as somebody who's looking at it from a purely not a podcast expert, looking at it from marketing and how do I use this new asset, this podcast that we would potentially be considering building to bring more people back to our page and to build our audience. I think it's really great to hear those two different strategies because I think they're both very important. And I think it's really cool that we have experts sort of in both so that we can bring that together and figure out how to make like the best possible thing that's going to get the most eyes back on the content that we're putting out. Or ears, I guess, not eyes and ears.
Awesome.
Well, thanks everybody. That's me again. Add me to LinkedIn if you'd like. We can chat a little bit more offline, but I'm always here last Monday of the month. So if you want to chat in person, and I'll be around in about a half an hour after we've had Christina go through this. So I'm going to pass things over to Kenzie to do the intros.